You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 4, Arson, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 28, Picking Through the Rubble.
A dragon cannot be kind or loyal. They are beasts of instinct, driven only by greed and hunger. To imagine otherwise is to invite an early death.
It had been a very long day before Kurode fought with Merle. Being battered by boulders, blown up, and then teleporting an entire school had taken what little he had left out of him. He barely had the energy to be happy for the birth of a new Luton. Shingle and the other collected Luton were joyful when the tiny boy emerged from beneath the scale that held him safe and hidden from the wizard. They were less joyful when Crow explained what had happened. Ingot said he and the other Luton would deal with Merle. What that meant wasn't clear, but the grim tone implied that a wizard was about to experience what it meant to make an enemy of Luton. With some encouragement from Merepogo, Crow had hidden himself away and let sleep take him. A scratching at the door woke Crow. He told it to go away and rolled over. Ignoring his request, the door opened, filling his hiding place with the horrible light of morning. The sun streaming in was an offense to all that is good and decent in the world. He covered his face with what remained of his jacket and tried to go back to sleep.
I thought you'd hide better, growled Dubois.
You'd find me eventually, grumbled Crow. You always do. Figured I'd save you the effort as a solstice gift. Happy Yule.
He was in the enchanting classroom's closet on a pile of fine silks he'd ruined by sleeping on them. Garmer sniffed and prodded Crow until he relented and sat up. The big wolf pressed into the space beside him. At least it gave the boy something soft to lean on. He smelled of old dog and garlic bread. Dubois slumped down on the other side. He looked terrible, and stank of burnt hair, ozone, and coffee. He'd given up on his uniform jacket, or perhaps it had given up on him, so he just wore a lightly singed linen shirt with his torn trousers and ruined boots, which meant he was speaking from a place of expertise when he told Kuro,
"You look terrible."
I got blown up and then chewed on by the universe. Show some humanity to the nearly dead.
Hey, at least you got some sleep after being blown up. I was dragged all over the kingdom cleaning up Roche copies.
Dubois rested his head against a bundle of broom bristles and gave up the fight between his eyelids and gravity.
Seems they made a personal enemy with the Luton. Never seen them angry before. I'd like not to again.
Claudius Roche wasn't the original,
Kuro informed the Hound.
I figured, but that's the name the papers know, so that's the one they'll print.
How many?
4, including Jellicoe and Merle. You wouldn't know the other 2, complete nobodies.
All high up in places with weird collections of stuff?
Dubois gave Crow a sidelong, quizzical glance.
Yup.
Wigs?
One had a hat. Forest ranger. Lived in a station at the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. His cabin was full of taxidermies of the things he hunted. Did you do this?
Dubois knocked on the wall, meaning to ask about the school as a whole.
Probably the same kid who did the boat,
said Crow, making no effort to sound convincing.
Maybe they felt bad leaving the school behind.
Dubois chuckled at the audacity of the lie.
And the dragons?
Kids like dragons.
They sat in silence, resting their eyes.
How bad are things in Bytown? Asked Crow.
Dragons are still there. The big one says she'll stay for about a week. Folk have evacuated for now, he explained. Then, after a pause, added, My house burned down.
I'm sorry, said Crow. So did mine.
I heard.
They shared a moment of mourning.
I loved that place.
Me too.
After another long pause, filled with light sniffles and labored breathing, Kuro decided to lighten the mood with a more comfortable topic for the pair.
How arrested am I?
More than you'd like, less than you'd think, said Dubois, grateful for more stable ground. Moving a school without a permit is technically only a bylaw infraction. The real trouble is trying to convince people the anchor is still working. It might help if you weren't wearing stolen goods. Kuro handed over the sword, albeit reluctantly. It was his, after all.
I don't know how to take the armor off,
he said, when Dubois gestured to the cuffs. We'd better find you some longer sleeves then, until Her Majesty can show you how.
Is she angry?
Asked Kuro. Not at the theft, said Dubois, but she's pretty miffed at you running off and nearly getting yourself killed again. A popular sentiment around here, I have to say. At least this time you only hid in a closet instead of 5 miles west of nowhere in the Blandlands. Dubois hauled himself up from the floor as though gravity had tripled its pull since he'd sat down. We shouldn't linger. People are worried, and your dragon friend is causing a bit of a stir. Kuro was suddenly very awake.
She said she was going to leave.
Yeah, she told us she would go after you woke up. Convincing her to let me come in here took some doing. It was like negotiating with a skyscraper. Kuro followed the hound out of the closet. Through the classroom window was proof of his claim. Filling the entire frame was a mosaic of an ocean wave in scales that glimmered like sapphire and emerald in the morning sun. Her enormous head, returned to the size she knew herself to be when not overwhelmed by Kuro's minuteness, rested by the main door. Her children, tuckered out after a long night of adventure, slept against her in a clumsy heap, a pile of snake spaghetti with bat wings. Over the edge of the plateau that had teleported along with the school, collected at what felt like a safe distance, were an assembly of onlookers. Teachers and students, knights and nobles, orphans and strays, Norns and Luton, all collected in common awestruck wonderment at the sight before them. Not at Kuro, of course. He looked like roadkill. He was staining the lab coat he'd borrowed from the alchemy class from the inside out. But an entire high school wrapped in dragon, gleaming as the morning sun cut through the clouds, was utterly mesmerizing. He drew profanities from Dubois when he casually jumped off the edge. It was barely a 2-story drop onto the soft ground, and the wind caught him easily even without the umbrella he'd lost in the fight. Walking to the assembled onlookers took much too long. It gave them a chance to notice him, form some opinions, and prepare remarks for when he arrived. The general consensus was that they were quite cross, though opinions differed on why. A few had decided he must be to blame for everything. That was clearly absurd, but he'd had an hour more forewarning than everyone else, so he must have done something wrong. Also, he was small enough to fit inside small minds, unlike the Lindworms. Others, mostly senior students, were upset about the school. It was twisted and bent from a messy teleportation and a rough landing, and it definitely shouldn't be where it was. It provided a focal point for their actual upset, which was a complicated mess of losing their home away from home, uncertainty about the future, a day of confusion and terror, and their understanding as to the workings of the world being turned upside down. Kuro was a more comfortable target. They were used to blaming him for things. He didn't fault them for this one. The truly angry, though, the ones who pushed to the front to express their outrage fully rather than just grumble their discontent, was a group of students and teachers. They didn't know if they wanted to shackle him, scream at him, exile him, or hug him. The first to break from the crowd, running as if Kuro were on fire and needed to be doused, was Ms. Crawley. She crashed into him, lifted him off his feet, and held him against her as if he'd turn to smoke and vanish if she let go. "I thought I'd lost you again," she said. Tired, injured, and in plain view of an antagonistic crowd, wasn't exactly the time and place he would have chosen to have a heart-to-heart with her. Her sniffles and vice-like grip explained her feelings well enough. He was, in part, her creation, her responsibility. So far as he knew, they were each the closest thing both of them had to real family. She played the part of the teacher, but despite her best efforts, she cared for him. She cared, and he'd gone off to get himself killed yet again without even saying goodbye. "I'm sorry," he said, though all he could think to say to make up for his inconsiderateness was, "I made you a pie, but a dragon ate it." She put him down, but clung to his shoulder, just in case he decided to run off into mortal peril again. Her outpouring of emotion had effectively silenced the crowd. No student was prepared to continue yelling at Kuro with their beloved teacher defending him. No adult was prepared to face her wrath if they angered her. Nobody was so callous as to interrupt such a heartfelt reunion. Except for the royalty. "Are you going to explain what you think you are doing?" shouted Marie. She stormed up and pressed an accusing finger into his chest. "You didn't have to go by yourself. We would have helped you." A chorus of agreement rose from her knights. "And you don't have to rob me. I'd lend you things if you asked." Interspersed in the crowd, blinking here and there, were Luton. Kuro caught sight of Shingle, who clasped her hands together in thanks, and through wet eyes and a smile, let him know that things were all right with her son. Ingot, too, appeared, and gave him a nod of approval for what he'd done. "No," said Kuro, "I can't explain. I promised." His friends knew what that meant. They wouldn't ask again. For the benefit of the others in attendance, he said, "It was probably all crime. I do that a lot, I hear. I'm a notorious thief." He then stepped in and hugged Marie tightly. The pair shared whispered words that would be the source of rumor and speculation for weeks to come in the gossip columns. For the official record, what was said was, "I can't get the cuffs off." "Yeah, they're a real pain. There's sort of a trick to it. I'll show you later." The ice broken, the others flooded in. Expressions of relief mixed with admonitions for making them worry, all of which were drowned out by Charlie demanding he tell the story so she could tell it again later, but better because he wasn't good at it. Arthur said, "Here's your raccoon. I'm glad I didn't have to look after him," in an utterly flat tone, but with eyes like a hound dog and hair like kelp. The poor boy had worried himself green. The knights crashed over him like a wave. They mussed his hair, which took some doing given how mussed it already was, and lauded him as a fellow hero. They celebrated his imagined victory over a villain and invented his conquest of dragons. They knew it was nonsense, as would be the stories of their triumph in New Camelot, but they were enjoying themselves, and so was he. Within the crush, he felt fingers intertwine with his. He turned to the owner and found he was looking up at Azalea. His gaze met tight lips and angry eyes, dark from lost sleep. She held up the note he'd left for her, explaining his regret should he not return. "I'm sorry," he said. "You better be," she replied, then squeezed his hand and gifted him the softest, warmest smile he might have ever seen. He thought he might like to see more of them. "I'm still mad at you," she clarified. The overwhelm was just threatening to crush him when the entire crowd, as one, stepped back. Silence took them, and they continued to put distance between them and Kuro as they stared skyward behind him. He turned to find Mere Pogo approaching, her footfalls surprisingly light for a walking escarpment.
"Are you recovered, Baker?"
"Pretty much," he said. "You?"
"Indeed. It is astonishing you carry such a heavy heart in such a small body. I could not lift it."
Kuro shrugged. What else could he do but carry it? He had on good authority that removing it would only make things worse.
"I need to leave soon," said the dragon. "My sons will get curious of the wizards and should not grow accustomed to them. It is not safe for either."
That was wisdom if he'd ever heard it.
"Also, I need to find a mate, and no worthy male would come to these lowlands."
That was probably also wisdom, but a dragony kind that Kuro couldn't quite fathom.
"But you should not be left alone with such darkness inside you."
Kuro was going to explain that he wasn't alone, that he had a family to care for him, but turned to find that family 100 yards away.
My daughter needs a lutin to show her the world, and you need a dragon to keep you safe and help carry your heavy burden."
This was not something he was adequately prepared for. He thought about arguing that he already had a troublesome raccoon to look after, but it hadn't been stated as an offer. How does one refuse Mere Pogo? The young dragon bounded up to him gleefully in a half-flying, half-gallop that would have been adorable had she been smaller than a moving van. She nuzzled him and chirped in a way that he understood to mean she would be taking care of him and his sadness by ensuring he spent a lot of time in the kitchen. Then Mere Pogo flew. She coiled her body like a spring and leapt as if diving into the ocean of sky. She swam through the air and clouds parted to make way for her passing. The flock of her sons followed, clumsy little creatures by comparison who needed wings and effort to fly. Kuro watched until she became nothing but a ribbon on the wind and was swallowed by the western horizon.
Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.